So it is very much my pleasure, and thank you for the honor of letting me do this, to introduce our guest speaker this evening, a very good friend of mine, Dr. Chris Chin. For those of you that don't know Chris, she's a longtime resident of Brookline who has held many leadership positions within local, state, regional, and national government and civic organizations. She's dedicated much of her life to working to promote racial, gender, and health equity. She served as a gubernatorial appointee to the Mass Asian American Commission and the Mass Commission on the Status of Women, where she advocated for the needs of Asian women and women throughout the Commonwealth. She currently serves as an adjunct assistant professor at Temple University, where she teaches public health advocacy, and she's chief magic officer and travel advisor of Chris Upon a Star Travel, which is a travel agency specializing in Disney and Universal destinations. And it's not surprising to those of us that know her that she finds tremendous joy in helping families make these arrangements. Dr. Chin has both a BA and an MPH from Boston University and a PhD in political science from Northeastern University, where she conducted research on health disparities. She's an immediate past chair of the executive board of American Public Health Association, an elected Brookline Library trustee and a town meeting member, a volunteer with the Brookline Community Emergency Response Team and the Medical Reserve Corps, holds a board position with the Brookline Community Foundation, and I believe just today, as we heard, was elected to the board of United for Libraries of the American Library Association. I'm exhausted, Chris. I had the honor to serve as co-chair of the Brookline Commission for Women with Chris for I think a decade, and have sat shoulder to shoulder with her at town meeting for that many years and counting. I call her one of my dearest friends, and I've always admired her commitment to our community. I also admire her strength and resilience over this last year while recovering from a massive brain aneurysm. She is a fighter, and I know, like many of you here, we are so grateful for her recovery. Is blessed with a wonderful husband, Jim, and 3 beautiful children, Hunter, Grace, and Genevieve. And I might say, actually, they're blessed with her. And we welcome you. It's my honor to welcome you. Sorry for the tears. I don't get to see her often, and remember the days seeing her over video while she was in the hospital. And we're so pleased and honored to have you here tonight to talk about anti-Asian racism being faced by our Asian community and ways in which all of us can serve as allies and support our Asian friends and family.
Hi, because I'm getting better. I think I cried for like a year straight. I spent so like it was we got to the point in my house where it would be amazing if I didn't cry that day. But I am really thankful, but I will try not to cry only because my eyes are a mess because of allergies already. And then I won't be able to see my slides, but I am so thankful. Casey, oh my gosh, I still remember in the emergency department texting being like, so I guess I have a ruptured brain aneurysm here. I don't know if I'll see anyone again because I really didn't, and the odds were totally against me. But 2 brain surgeries later, a stent and 5 metal coils, and we've made it 1 year. So I'm trying to get back into life and things. So I was excited to see you all, and so very thankful for so many amazing friends and people throughout Brookline, many who are right here in this Zoom screen, who really helped my family, my kids and Jim and me as we get back and get out of the hospital. But I wanted to say, so Shulan is here also, and Alicia Shu are here because I am just one of about 7 members of the Brookline Asian American Family Network Steering Committee, BAFN, which you might have heard of. And Shulan and Alicia Shu are 2 really important members, and they're here, and they can probably chime in if I mess up or misspeak or add more information, because they've been doing advocacy for longer than I have, and they are just so in the weeds on this. But I am happy to turn on my professor hat tonight and do a very quick overview of decades of history and try to get us going. It's sad because I normally love everything about the Rotary and seeing you all. And I actually just really miss the pancake breakfast, which normally happens about now. My kids really like it. And it's sad that like, instead of a pancake breakfast, we're talking about this topic, which I know is important, but I wish instead we were having pancakes over this. But I appreciate, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to share more about the work that we're doing. So that's me. And I'm not 100% doing everything that I want to do, but my neurosurgeon assures me that I'm stronger now than before because I have these metal coils and a stent, and hopefully I'll get back to doing all good and fun things with all of you. So today we're going to do just sort of a brief overview of this unfortunate topic of discrimination, violence, and racism against Asian Americans. I'll do a brief overview, but then hopefully towards the end, I'll be able to provide you with information about how you can be an ally, what can you do, because as with any class I teach, with my students at least, I always want to leave them not just with like a bunch of information, but rather here's information and here's an actionable item that you can follow through on. Because I always think if you know a lot and you have the opportunity, you have to do a lot, right? And at the Brookline Rotary, you've obviously been incredibly impactful, and I'm very thankful as a Brookline resident. And I've seen all you've done throughout town, Kids Clothes Club, Steps to Success, Kesawake in our sister city, just so many things throughout, and the Special Olympics now, and just really appreciate it. So I'm thankful that you will be an ally to our Asian American community. But unfortunately, this topic isn't a new topic. So it's not like I'm just talking about it because it happened this year or last year. And unfortunately, it didn't happen all of a sudden because we were in a pandemic, but rather it's quite sad. We have this long and terrible history of racism and discrimination for decades within the United States. And as Asian Americans, we have continued to, and still today, struggle for visibility and equity, fighting racism, xenophobia, and the model minority myth, and there's so much. And this COVID pandemic, though, like so many other injustices, shed a light on problems and brought to light this, which in some ways, I'm hoping it will be good, because as our nation demands change, and as we try to get back, I don't actually want us to go back. I don't want us to get back to normal, because the normal of before wasn't working for many people, right? Childcare, climate change, lack of health insurance, a lot of stuff, food insecurity, a lot of stuff really wasn't working for people. Lack of affordable housing. So I hope that as we go forward into a new normal, we will address these things, and also hopefully really address anti-Asian racism and xenophobia. But unfortunately, this isn't new. I don't know if folks have heard of Vincent Chin before, but just in case you haven't, and it's been a long day, it's the end of a Thursday. He is very famous, unfortunately, in our Asian American community. But his name comes up now because he's someone that so much of what we see now just brings this back to us. So in case you don't know, what happened was in 1982, Vincent Chin was out celebrating for his bachelor party that evening. And he's Chinese American, and he was in Michigan. And these two white men who worked for Chrysler, the automobile company, were really upset. At the time, there was all this anti-Japanese like feelings and sentiment. So they took a baseball bat and beat him on his bachelor party that night because they were upset and they felt that they were losing all this business to China. So there's so much held in that I can't like unwrap, but it's more like, first, Asians are not a monolith, meaning, they were upset about, the Japanese sentiment and all that, but he was Chinese. And so now, and we see this now today, right? And then also that what happened to him, there was no justice, unfortunately. They beat him so badly, he went to a coma. 4 days later, he died, and he was buried on the day after he was supposed to be married. And nothing happened. The two men never served a day in jail. There were 2 cases, 2 trials. In the first trial, the judge said, well, these aren't the type of men that you want to send to jail. Like, you don't make the punishment fit the crime. You make the punishment should fit the criminal. So they let him free. And then it rose to the level of a federal case. But in the end, one was acquitted and the other was found not guilty. I mean, never served a day in jail. So the tangible effects of his death just continue to percolate throughout the Asian American community. And we see it now today. For example, I believe the 94-year-old man in San Francisco who was just randomly beaten, that's, I believe right now it's not even still considered a hate crime. And that just happened a few months ago. Some things did happen from Vincent Chin's death that are hopefully, we can move forward from. So victims' families now actually can deliver victim impact statements now because of what happened in his case. And because of his case, they inspired generations of Asian Americans to sort of rise up and become activists and lawyers. But this isn't, unfortunately, anti-Asian racism isn't new. In 1871, there was a mob in Los Angeles, in Chinatown in Los Angeles. They attacked and murdered 19 Chinese people, including a 15-year-old boy, because this was building up right before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And that act obviously banned Chinese laborers. Then there was the 1875 Page Exclusion Act, which was the nation's most restrictive immigration law at the time that prohibited the entry of Chinese women into the US. And then you have World War II and the internment of Japanese Americans as well. And then obviously 1982 and Vincent Chin. So my whole point here is all of this was supported by our government. Our anti-Asian racism was supported by, sanctioned by our government. That we had Japanese internment camps by our government. We had these acts. The courts said these men were not guilty and acquitted them. So it continues to happen, and it did happen. So the American Journal of Public Health did research, has been doing long time of research, and they also looked at how our words matter, in particular in this pandemic. And they published research recently that looked at the effect of what happens when you call this pandemic COVID-19, or do you use Kung flu or the Chinese virus? And obviously words matter. And they showed that with empirical evidence. And we can see that when you look at what our former President Trump said. I mean, he regularly called it Kung flu, the Chinese virus, and just it was not helpful to the case. And that led to a lot of, for a huge increase in rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. And we've seen it now, almost about 4,000 since a year ago. Also, we even had here in Massachusetts, our own Congressman Seth Moulton at one point added to all of this normalization of hate and Trump's rhetoric by putting together a legislation, by trying to put together legislation with representative banks where they wanted the Chinese government to, be faulted for their mishaps. In the end, of course, he realized that that was not helpful to the pandemic at all, and he pulled back from it. But in general, the Asian American community has seen such an increase in coronavirus related attacks that basically have spread throughout. And the effects of these words and how they matter make a huge difference. And there's a ton of research about it, which I could go into, but I don't know if I have time for this. But I am hopeful because we have a new president who actually sent out a formal memorandum that condemned racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against Asian Americans. And that was really hopeful. So he did that last month in March. And he said, anti-Asian violence and xenophobia is wrong. It's un-American and it must stop. And he issued a number of different points of action. For example, starting up again the WIAPI, the White House Initiative on Asian American and Pacific Islanders, increasing funding for AAPI survivors of domestic violence and assaults, looking at more research into Asian Americans and discrimination and xenophobia. So I'm happy that that's supported by the government, but we've had many years where it wasn't the case. The effects of COVID-19. So obviously we know that the coronavirus outbreak has fundamentally changed so much for so many communities throughout our nation globally. The health and economic consequences that are felt, though, throughout the American public are felt even more so in this coronavirus pandemic by our Black and Asian members. And they extend beyond the financial and medical concerns. It's to a point where there's so much research that shows that Black and Asian adults are even find that people are just uncomfortable around them. I remember really clearly early on in the pandemic, before my aneurysm, walking outside with a mask, and I coughed, but I had a mask on. And this was right here in Washington Square. And this man, and his children did a huge wide 180 detour away from me because I think he was like, oh my gosh, she has, she's Asian, looking Chinese American perhaps. And I was like, I know I don't have it. I haven't gone anywhere, but alas, people feel this discomfort, and then the effects are felt by your community members. The Pew Research Center has done a lot of research. So here, for example, they show that Asian and Black Americans are more likely than other groups to report negative experiences because of their race and ethnicity since the start of the coronavirus outbreak. Actually, it's 31% of Asian and Black Americans are, and that's much more than, say, white adults who feel that, that's at 8%. 4 in 10 Americans say it's more common for people to express racist views about people who are Asian than they did before the pandemic happened. So, it's at the point where they just feel that they can share more, they can say it, be increasingly more racially insensitive than they ever were before. And the community feels it. And there's a lot of research out there, evidence-based research that shows that the stress of just hearing someone say negative things about your race causes a rise in your cortisol, which is a stress hormone in your body. And if you have this rise in cortisol for so long, chronically, for a very long time, often, you can end up with problems like diabetes or heart problems like chronic cardiovascular disease. And there's a huge body of research that shows that that is the case. There was even a study that looked at a bunch of Latino students. They were taking a test, or they were sitting in a room, and outside the hallway in the room, this was in a study that was done in California in 2017. And in the hallway, they had people walk by, and one set of people, were just talking about weather, something totally unrelated. But then they also had people who walked by and said things that were basically racist about Latino students, like, why don't they pronounce their names that way? Like, why do they say that? Like, they're in America. Then they measured the students' cortisol level and compared that to having them also do the puzzles. And they found the students' cortisol level from in doing the puzzles when they heard the racist language and rhetoric was twice as high, right? So if you think about all this, words matter, right? And I think we all know that because we don't appreciate it when people say unkind things to us. And then Black and Asian Americans are also most likely to report adverse experiences due to the race or ethnicity. There is now, and I'll get to a slide that shows it, we've had at least 4,000 incidences of hate against Asian Americans. And that has happened since the start of the pandemic last year. And people are, it's not just the slurs, it's not just the jokes, but we've seen that people get physically attacked. So there's a group that started this called StopAAPIHate.org, and I welcome you to check out this website. So Kulkarni, Choi, and Jung, they had said, Asian Americans watch something spread faster than COVID-19, widespread hate and discrimination against members of our community. So this amazing group, they created this Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center. And what was really sad is they said, we wanted to create this center so we could capture what we saw as the increasing number of attacks. And unfortunately, we're a year later and people are seeing the light in the tunnel, people are getting their vaccines, there's all this hope. But unfortunately, we're really not seeing an end in sight for anti-Asian hate. If anything, I feel like it's getting worse. And when the 8 people were killed in Atlanta, 6 of them Asian women, everyone was surprised. Not everyone, a lot of people were surprised. And I was not surprised because this is largely sort of something that, we just sort of fear and know it expects. Like my parents, I think I had spoken earlier, they live in Maryland. They're a little bit older and I get very concerned. I don't want them walking around outside by themselves, although I don't know if together they're that much better anyways. I have a lot of, Thai, Chinese, Asian American relatives. I get worried, and I can't do anything because I'm over here in Brookline. And it is scary. And to hear my mom say things like, oh, I'm not going out, I'm just afraid, and in some ways I'm like, okay, good, stay at home. But that's also terrible because we know the effects of social isolation, in particular social isolation on older adults, coupled with the pandemic, and she doesn't get to see her grandkids, it's pretty terrible. So as we see, they started this organization and they found that there were, by a year later, there's nearly 4,000 self-reported hate incidences from the AAPI community. And a lot of it, they believe, came from the normalization of this hate rhetoric that our former president gave. And in particular, something to call out because it is related to it, and a lot of it, I just have to mention because of gender equity issues, is that women, and in particular Asian women, reported more incidences than men. There are 2.3 incidences of AAPI hate reported by women than there were of men as well, because the women are also being sexually harassed as well. And COVID-19 has actually been weaponized now as a part of this sexual harassment. So, and we see this, we see the 75-year-old woman who had to fight back, and a GoFundMe got started. And it raised nearly $1 million, thankfully, but she's like, no, I need to donate this to a cause to really help get this, because she's like, I'm 75 years old and this is still happening. I am walking down the street at 75 years old and someone would strike her. When I see this woman, I'm like, oh my God, it looks like could be any one of my relatives. It's heartbreaking. And then to hear about the other women in Atlanta and their children that are left behind and their families. I mean, it's truly heartbreaking. But for unfortunately, it's just like another day, right? Things haven't gotten better. But I will leave us with actionable items in the hopes that we will do things better. So Stop AAPI Hate again, they offer a number of solutions of things we can do. I think they're great. There's so many different resources out there. So I had to just like make a decision and go with one for now, but they offer a lot of solutions, and these are all different. It's complex, it's because racism against Asian Americans is complex and longstanding. Like, we're not going to solve the problem today, and it's not just a simple, easy, whatever. It's going to need a comprehensive, multifaceted approach to take. So, for example, we want to provide resources to our local communities. You want to provide translation services for both mental health, legal, and immigration services. They recommend building a strong civil rights infrastructure as well. Also, just ensuring that we increase the exposure to the voices and histories of communities by having them learn about our ethnic studies. I saw the funniest meme. So there's and I think it's in Illinois, they're going to, I think there's legislation now to have Asian American history as part of their curriculum, which is amazing, because as a member of the BaFin steering committee, I remember for like, I don't know, over 10 years now, we continue to go to the high school and continue to ask them, please don't cut this elective Asian American history class. Don't cut this elective. And it's just so sad that we have to ask not to cut this and that it's an elective, when there are now other states that realize it's important. And it's important because, as we know, if we didn't know our history, we are doomed to repeat it, right? And I saw the funniest meme, and it said something like, how come, it was something along the lines of basically like, your white supremacy is that your history is taught, but mine is an elective, right? So just things to think about, and I'll talk about that more. And then we do need to really work hard at this. So within, because I like to give people actionable things. So within the Brookline Asian American Family Network in BaFin, which Alicia Hsu, who is a Haverly Award-winning school teacher from Brookline at the Lawrence School, she's amazing. She still now works to help support our Asian American teachers and teachers of color. And I will talk more specifically about what Alicia and BaFin is doing in the schools, but also she and Shulan Chang, which y'all know of Fast Frames, Brookline Women of the former Brookline Women of the Year, they are part of BaFin. And there's also a number of others. There's Grace Watson, who is also on the Brookline Commission for Women, Karen Wang, who's on the Brookline Education Fund Board, Linda Chinson Louie as well, and then Chi Wu, who's on the advisory committee as well, and she is our chair. So collectively, as a steering committee for BaFin, it got created actually in 2009. I don't know if you can remember, but in 2009, Ira Chan was up for election for school committee, and he had lost his seat. And then that was a point where everyone realized, wow, we don't have any Asian American representation on our school committee, but Asians are the largest community of color in our schools and actually in town. And we have very few representation of Asian Americans anywhere within our town administration or government. So BaFin was formed to really advocate for the needs of students and families, Asian American students and families. And we realized that there were so many things where, it was sad because they are the largest community with very little voice. And also we had to, as BaFin, fight this model minority myth, this idea that all Asian people are super duper smart, good at math and science, and play the violin and do all these wonderful things. But that's not the case with all the students. And I can tell you right now, I cannot play an instrument to save my life. My children regularly ask me to be quiet because my singing voice is so horrible. So, and my math, I don't know if it's that great. So we fight this model minority myth, right? But that prevents a lot of students from getting the needed school or mental health services that they might want as well. And there are so many more things. So please feel free to join our listserv, check out our website. But in particular, BaFin has been advocating for a while. So Chi Wu, on behalf of BaFin, actually spoke very recently to the select board. And I wanted to talk about some of the tangible, actionable items that the BaFin steering committee, Chi Wu, all of us, and our community really would find helpful in combating this anti-Asian racism. So the first would be to have services to support the AAPI community. So things like social workers, there is not one Asian American social worker in all of our schools, which is sort of interesting and mind-boggling all at the same time, for example. And we need to have, more services in translation and in interpretation, for example. And you can't just assume that everyone who's Asian is Chinese, for example. I'm Thai and I actually don't speak Chinese. I speak Thai, and then we have Korean populations and Japanese. So a real strong need for translation interpretation services. Using Google to translate is not always the best thing, as I'm sure anyone knows. If you've ever tried to Google Translate something and then you've totally miscommunicated and it was very embarrassing, right? So it's just not the way to go. And then data collection. So data collection is something that actually I've been advocating with others for at the state and national level, because a lot of times it's Black, white, other, Black, white, Hispanic, non-Hispanic, white, other. Now we're excited because sometimes they collect Asian, but a lot of times they don't. And then also within Asian, there's a real push among public health researchers like myself to have disaggregated data, which means don't just say Asian or Asian American, but rather Chinese, Japanese, Hmong. Because if you looked at, for example, breastfeeding rates among Asian Americans, they would kind of skew higher, but that's really because Japanese Asian Americans maybe nurse more. But if you were to look at, say, some Southeast Asian Americans, they don't nurse as much, so their breastfeeding rates were lower. So that's like just an example to say that you need disaggregated data collection. And then obviously multilingual materials on reporting hate crimes. Right now, you can go to the diversity office in town and put a complaint in for discrimination, but it's only in English, and that's not very helpful. So a translation of materials would be would be a great help. And then also greater AAPI civic participation. So the idea is making it more easy, making it more encouraging and inviting and welcoming to the AAPI community to join your town meeting, to join your boards and your commissions. How friendly are we and open and inviting? And do we make those services, do we make these programs, welcome to all? So that was one thing that Baffin had done. But then Baffin also wrote specifically through Alicia Shu, who will probably could speak even better than I can here, about, she actually presented to the school committee specifically things that we want to see that would really help our student population, and then obviously their families. So one is looking at an intentional focus on AAPI remote learners and returning learners. So the idea is, so we might not know this, but a lot of people who want to continue to stay in what's known as the Remote Learning Academy right now, even as kids return to school, are Asian families. Because they are scared about the bullying and the hate crimes and the rhetoric. How heartbreaking would it be for my child to go back to school and then come home and everyone's like blaming my child because they brought the Kung flu that shut down the town, the nation, right? So it is true. And people are very concerned and very scared. And so with that, Baffin, through a grant supported by the Brookline Community Foundation, and with amazing students, Brookline High School alums, Miles Young and Max, and others, under Alicia Shu's guidance, worked with many people in collaboration with many other town departments on actually a bullying curriculum for anti-Asian racism. And it's been unveiled now in the high school. And we're working on a part 2 of that now with funding from the Community Foundation so that we can have this curriculum for middle school, which we know bullying happens in middle school, obviously. And we know that we'll need greater supports when kids go back to school. And then, having AAPI books in school libraries, which we are now physically working on, because as you can see, if you don't read or see things with you in it, like in movies, then you just don't feel like you're a part of it, right? You need to see yourself in it. And also the inclusion of Asian American history. And then we're also working on having these amazing displays in every school for this May and every May to celebrate AAPI Heritage Month, so that students can feel that they are important and a part of the community and aren't, something that we should hate, for example, or be scared of. Also more efforts on teacher workshops and diversity training. At one point, we were able to have this amazing teacher, this amazing social worker come in and speak for a day for professional development to all of our teachers in school, and it got canceled. And now we're trying, and now this woman is like not world renowned. So we're hopeful in Baffin that we can never get her back, but we need to do this. And Alicia had it all set up. We also don't even have a director of educational equity anymore. She left. We need more AAPI educators and staff. And I don't mean a lot of times a student's only interaction with an Asian teacher is if they take Chinese class, for example, and that's their Chinese language teacher. But how interesting is it if your teacher was Asian American, but also taught your history class, for example, or your math class or whatever, right? So that makes a huge difference. And we want to see more of that. Also supporting an Asian American affinity club, similar to what we have with the African American Latino Scholars Club. And then obviously professional translators. I will just give you a bit about it, but it is a real problem. We do not have professional translators in our schools. And you may or may not have kids in the school system, but if you do, during COVID, we get more communication than I think I have ever received in email, in my entirety of life. It's every day I can't keep up. I'm deathly afraid a child will be forgotten somewhere because it happened to be an early dismissal day. I do not know how people who do not speak English as a first language are able to keep up, right? Secondly, when they are translated, sometimes they are not translated well, translated potentially using things like Google Translate. At one point, I think there was a letter sent home that said something like, and it was supposed to be translated into Korean, and it said something like, if you, have any of these COVID symptoms, you should stay quarantined for whatever many days. But then I guess the Google Translate it for when I think it went into Korean was something like, if you have these symptoms, you can never come back to school again. So the parents are like, oh my God, we best only stay in the remote learning academy then, because should I ever even have a sniffle or a cold, I may never be able to go back to the Brookline schools. I mean, these are things that are really true and really happen. I've heard stories of, parents and teachers having their parent teacher conferences, and the teacher says, we're working on the building blocks of learning and things like that. And we want to make sure that your child has those fundamental building blocks of learning and da, 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 da. And the translator, who might translate, but doesn't understand the context of translating in education, went and told the parent something like, we need to get your kid more blocks, at home. And that's totally not what the parent teacher conference was about. So these things happen all the time, and it's terrible, and I don't understand why we continue to have it, but these are some of the things that we need to do differently. Now, Shulan Chang is on, so she can speak better than I can, but she's amazing and has been spearheading this. This will be our sixth year doing it this May 5th. I recommend you register now, because our Zoom, your Zoom only has a limit to it, but we're actually going to have a Brookline High School alum who is a staff writer at ESPN, June Lead, come and speak, and you'll get to hear from the new school superintendent. But what's most important is you're going to hear from our essay contest winners, where these students write incredibly about what does it mean to be Asian American for them in Brookline. So you will get to hear from them what their experience is like right now living in Brookline in a pandemic. It's incredible. And I am thankful to be a judge for this contest, but I will say every single one of their essays was meaningful and touching. But what made me really sad was I felt like not much has changed since I was in high school. What is going on? And so we need to do better, and I think we can. So please join us on May 5th for this amazing contest. A lot of time and effort has been put in to it, but there are also a lot of other, resources. So again, our website, our Baffin Weebly website, which our steering committee member, Linda Chinson Louie, manages, and it's amazing, has a bunch of resources related to both anti-Asian racism, but also with regards to COVID and children and families. Also, last year in April, we had a town hall with our select board members, Raul Fernandez and Professor Andrew Leung of UMass Boston, and they spoke about the history of anti-Asian American racism and what was going on at the time. And this was from last year. And then, of course, I recommend all of you do the Hollaback bystander intervention training. It's really important, but there's just a lot. I mean, we could spend all day talking about it. There's a lot that we can do. So for example, you know, our budget in town is hard and terrible. And I think we're actually looking to see happen again, like it did last year, a lot of teachers who are going to get, you know, cut again this year. And unfortunately, I think a lot of them will be our teachers of color and our Asian American teachers. And we've already lost some from last year. And it's hard to gain them back once they've gone off to like another school system. But these are things that would make a huge difference in the lives of their students. You know, it is hard to go through your whole education in town and never have an Asian American teacher, for example, or someone who can understand where you are. But yes, so I think I've probably gone over time. Oh my goodness. So I do want to thank, obviously the Brookline Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations does a lot of support in helping Bethan in our advocacy. The Brookline Community Foundation has done quite a lot in providing us grant funding, in particular for the anti-Asian bullying curriculum. And then we have had great partners with so many members throughout our public schools of Brookline. So we're really thankful. But I can answer questions, so I will stop now. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you very much, Chris, for this very, really important talk and life experience of yours and your family and your friends. Being an immigrant, I've experienced things that I can also talk about. So I understand you. I fully understand you, and I understand you also because at the very beginning of the pandemic, I used to go once a week to a sushi restaurant up on Route 9. It's Shiharu. I don't know if you know it. It's owned by a Chinese, lovely Chinese family. Beautiful people, and I enjoyed it every Friday. My wife and I will go for dinner there, so it was like weekly lunch and dinner. And at the very beginning, I do not forget walking there, and the poor chef was shivering. They had just gotten phone calls, threatening phone calls, of being responsible for the virus. It's amazing. You're right. It's happening. And it's even here in Brookline. It is happening. So we all have to be aware. We all have to, and I thank you. I thank you very much. And having said that also, I really would like to invite, on behalf of the club, I'd like to invite you, any one of your member of your organization, to join our club as a non-profit organization. So you'll have a representation at all times in our club, which is very, very helpful, I would say, to your cause, to us. We will learn more. And Shulan used to be a member of our club. She dropped out on her own a while ago. I'm not faulting her, but we'd love to see her come back. But really, we'll invite your organization to be represented in our club. We can talk later about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? Alberta.
Well, thank you, Chris. I learned so much from your presentation. But why do you think racism against Asian Americans is getting worse now?
So I don't actually know necessarily if it's getting worse, but I think we're very much aware of it now, because now you can record things on your phone. People have the ability to use the internet. And there are mechanisms for reporting now that didn't exist before. because I guess I don't want to say that there's more now than before, because I feel like that's almost disrespectful to my parents, who would say like things were like really bad, when they came here. And my parents were like scared of walking on the street. I mean, now they kind of are too, but it's sort of different, right? I do think it is very things are very tense, and also I think a lot of it is because where people are pitting different groups of people of color against each other, which is not helpful to anybody, any group, any community of color, right? So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is there's so much anger and angst, and you're in this pandemic, which they feel came from China. So it just seemed natural to scapegoat and direct your anger at someone else because this isn't your fault, when that doesn't also help the situation at all, right? That doesn't make things better for anyone, let alone you. I think that's another thing. And I think the other thing is, I don't know, but I think, and I hope, I mean, everyone uses the computer, the internet, and social media, but I also wonder if it's allowed us to normalize speech and language that is less than kind, and gives you a bigger megaphone to do it at. And then you meet other people who also can amplify your voice that is not kind. And so I think that has been a big part of it, is people can all find all of their other fellow not kind people. I think that's another thing. And I think the other thing is, like, I guess I am really hopeful though. Like, I don't want to say like it's all bad, because if it is, I should just honestly give up. And I don't, because I want things to be better for everyone. Is that I've seen so after Vincent Chin, we had all these activists that got spurred. Like, people went, like, we have Chi-Chi's a lawyer, for example. We went and got people who went into fields where they could maybe make a difference in our systems. And now I see so many young people out there. Like, there's so many young students. I teach students, and they are so energizing, and they are like not ready to give up. If anything, like, they're ready to take over. And I see, my children who don't even understand why people, at one point my kids are like, why do people even do these things? And I'm like, I don't know. And we put up a, anti-Asian hate sign on my front little thing. And my kids are like, why is this sign there? Like, what's going on? And I'm like trying to explain it to them. And they're like, well, why do we need one? And, and because I am hopeful that we will do better for our next generation. And I see younger people now already doing it, but it's not just younger people though. So Shu Lan formed this great organization called GASP, which is like Greater Boston Asian American Seniors for Peace and Justice. I hope I did that right, Shu Lan. And she started a group where also older adults can join who want to combat anti-Asian racism as well. And she's calling it GASP, and they have like a group, and it's amazing. And they have yellow whistles. So I'm just really hopeful that people are like, you know what, I'm done. Like we're ready to like move on together as a community. I think Mary Louise, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I had a comment. Thank you. That I think today was passed some legislation supporting anti-American Asian American discrimination, I guess. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's probably quite important to the community.
Yeah, no, I'm so that was with, I think it was spearheaded possibly by Senator Tammy Duckworth. And they just did that. And I love Tammy Duckworth because she's also part Thai. So I feel like,
oh, really? Oh, okay.
So I'm like, yay. And I kind of actually wanted Tammy Duckworth for some reason to run for president at one point, because then I'd be like, we have a Thai American president. Like, that would be like amazing. My family would freak out. But yes, so we do that. We have that. There's legislation working in Illinois that I think that got passed to do the Asian American curriculum. And I think there's other anti-Asian, Grace Meng, a congresswoman, is also putting forth more legislation. So people are there, like there's an effort. And what's really great is they're making efforts not alone anymore. Asian Americans are, there with other communities of color, because we all realize that there's no point in, we are all trying to help each other combat the systemic racism in our system. And I think that will also hopefully help. George.
There we go. Could you, off the top of your head, come up with 2 things that it would be helpful for our club to do as an entity, and 2 things that it would be helpful for each of us as individuals to do here and now to combat the racism, to support Asian American community in Brookline?
So I guess I would say one, personally, or maybe even collectively, do these free online, you can do them on Zoom, bystander intervention trainings.
Okay.
I really recommend you could do it together as a group, as a watch party, or you could do it singularly on your own at home. They're free. I really recommend you do that, because I think there are times when, and we saw it, like there was an Asian American woman who was getting beaten by a man. And then the people were like, that's really loud. And they like shut the door to the lobby while she was getting beaten. And this happened like a month ago. And I was like, what? And so people are just like uncomfortable and they don't know what to say. So let's get rid of that. Do your bystander intervention training, and then bring, and the holla back one, which I can try to Google and put the link in. The holla back bystander intervention training is really good. So I recommend that. And I also recommend, so you do that collectively, you do yourself, and then you have others do it. Because in Brookline, while Asians are the largest community of color, our community is largely Caucasian. So there's like a lot of bystanders potentially for this, right? So to have others do it as well. And in particular, have young people do it, because we know that a lot, everyone's out and about. Like it's also good for like your 14-year-old to do, if you have a grandchild or whatever, so I think that's really important. The other thing is, and I don't know if you can or you want to, but I really recommend, oh, thank you, Joyce. I really recommend, if you can, we're coming into town meeting. We're going to have these debates about the budget, but to continue to tell your school committee members, your town administrator, and whoever, that when they make decisions in their school committee budget, which is like, 60% of our town's budget, cutting teachers, and in particular, teachers of color and the more junior teachers, that will have a detrimental impact. Because we know that students need to see themselves in their teachers, and and those teachers have a lived experience. So we've already lost some already this past year, and we're getting close to possibly losing more again this year. So if you can, be an ally and advocate and say like, no, hey, it also looks like the budget may be able to provide for 7 more social workers to be hired at the high school, maybe. Ask that one of them be Asian American. Just one, maybe. Would that be okay? Or 2, yeah,
2.
George, go for the sky, like shoot for the moon.
Absolutely.
Right? But could just one be Asian American? We have an APAC club, like an Asian American Pacific Islander club for students, but we don't have that. Also, don't stand by when the high school cuts the Asian American class. I don't want to go anymore to the dean's office with my Baffin colleagues and beg him to please keep it. Like, I don't want to do that anymore. That's terrible. It's an elective and it's going to get threatened to get cut. Like, it shouldn't be either one of those things. So let's stop that. That's ridiculous.
Thank you.
Right? Okay. Yep. And then I guess another final thing is translators. We need professional translators in our schools. And I actually want real translators in our town offices. Like, not just a language line that you call, but someone who understands the context of what it is that you're talking about, right? We need that. And we don't have that. And I can't understand why in a town like Brookline, we don't have that. It saddens me when my Asian friends contact me because I've heard that they need translation services on their translated items. That's crazy. Or what has happened is sometimes they check off a box and the parent gets like their communication only in the other language, but maybe that's not translated well and correctly, but it's also not in English. They don't get both pieces of paper. So their child who does speak English actually can't help them. And I know as a child of immigrants, a lot of times I was translating my stuff for my parents. I did my college application.
Yeah, classic. Yeah.
So seriously, we're in Brookline. We can do better. But that's all. Those are
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. I'll take my professor hat off.
Well, Chris, thank you very, very much again. Thanks a lot for coming and being our speaker today. You truly taught us a lot. Like Alberta said, we learned a lot from you. Discrimination and hate in this country becoming another culture that we don't need. And truly, I can say it's not just anti-Asian and anti-Black. It's anti-everything.
Yes, it is.
Groups, and every group there are another group that's anti. It's like we need to stop that. We need to be one community, one country, one people, one culture. That's what we need to do. And thank you advocating for your own race, for your own community. That's great. We all need to do that. We all need to be aware, and I appreciate it. And now. Like I said again, I will say it again, we'll invite your organization to join our club. Your voice is very important and will be powerful with us. We'll add power. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
seeing you
so
all.
much, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks.
I will carry what I learned out to Natick, because that is where my son George, or Jordy, who was one of Alicia Shu's first grade students at Lawrence School, is now on town meeting, has kids in school, and I bet that they suffer from the same kinds of things we do, which includes the ignorance and just the not realizing. So thank you again for that.
Thank you.
Everybody. This is
Thanks.
really
It was so
Thank
good
you,
to meet
Chris.
you
And good night.
all.
Good
Thanks.
night, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.